You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
We're all holed up today.
We are. It's kind of fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's timely that we did Nutrition is Not an Emergency last week, and
Yes.
people tend to be raiding grocery shelves right now thinking that there's going to be a food shortage. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I understand why people are concerned. But, it really is interesting that this idea that everyone thinks that they need to run out and buy milk, eggs, and bread, three things that we don't ever eat, really.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, today's podcast is going to be a lot of fun. Our really good friend, David Goldman, is on today. He's a fellow dietitian
With a sports background.
and he's a sports nutritionist and exercise physiologist, and he's worked with collegiate, professional, and Olympic athletes. He's worked from NCAA Division I strength and conditioning and obesity research and corporate health and performance at Facebook. But currently, David is the chief science advisor to the Game Changer movie.
Yeah, he did a great job. He's still working and showing all of the evidence of all of the stuff that they talk about in that very inspiring film. And he just does such a good job at getting this nutrition message out. And he's just got such a great perspective. So I'm looking forward to talking with him.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun having my two favorite geek friends on a conversation. So you're going to hear a real sort of unscripted conversation with the three of us, and all of us are equal nutrition geeks. So, with that, let's bring in David Goldman. David, welcome. We're glad to have you on today.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be with you guys.
And my two favorite dietitians, which is fantastic to have.
Aw.
It's I met David originally. I want you to talk a little bit about your background as well, but I met him originally when I was doing my 24-day fast. And David is as much of a geek as Juliana is about nutrition. And I would say
it's a compliment.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
And these two people, it was really great because he rated my books every day while I was there. So every day he came up for articles and knew of the old books. I had a lot of my library because I was writing while I was there. So it was really a lot of fun for us to go through that. And I love the fact that what's great about David is he loves to be challenged and he loves to challenge. So he challenged a lot of my assertions along the way, and we had a really great time. Tell us a little bit about your background, David, and then let's talk a little bit about how we've all ended up here.
Sounds good. And by the way, I loved that time at True North when we were hanging out during your fast, and how you broke it and showed with that was a fancy, right, the oral glucose tolerance test. You showed some incredible things that rocked my world. So I love that. And yeah, just seeing your library there was incredible. I've never seen anyone travel with so many books.
I had my midlife crisis calorimeter. We actually measured your metabolism with mild cold stress too, which was really kind of fun. So we had a lot of fun during that time.
I agree. I loved it. Okay. So, background. So I have, my graduate education is in both applied physiology and nutrition. So, exercise science and really everything related to food. I became a registered dietitian. I got a CSSD, or Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. So the same thing that people are working who are the team dietitians for pro sports teams. And I also got a credential as a Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, or a CSCS. So those are my main credentials. I guess so background. I worked in strength and conditioning for Columbia University Athletics, and on the food side as well over there. I worked in clinical obesity research over at St. Luke's Hospital. What else? I worked. So I helped kick off Facebook headquarters nutrition program. So they didn't have anything up in place. I was their first dietitian and helped build that program up, which was absolutely awesome. I really enjoyed that.
That's fantastic. How long were you at True North overseeing people fasting?
A couple of years. I'm really bad with time, so I don't remember exactly how long, but definitely a couple of years. That was really fun. Yeah. So True North. That was really fun being the I think it was like director of nutrition and fitness and helping people. Yeah, just like you said, on the fasting front and on the refeeding front. And when do you introduce physical activity into that mix, and how much of it, and helping people sort of navigate a new space. So all that, and now Game Changers. So working as a scientific or chief science advisor for the Game Changers.
So, I want to ask something both to you and Juliana, because it's sort of an interesting idea, but as dietitians, especially with what you go through with your education leading up to it, this concept of this idea of, fasting and, extended period times without, nutrition, was that for both of you guys, was that kind of a sort of a sort of a worldview shaker for you guys?
Well, we talked about it last week on the podcast about how nutrition is not an emergency, much in opposition to what we're trained to believe and teach and coach and make sure that people don't run out of nutrition. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, David.
Yeah, I agree with you. It totally runs counter to everything we were taught. We were taught all things in moderation, right? And there's nothing less moderate than completely abstaining from food for an extended period of time. I mean, right, we learned that that's eating disorder-ish.
Right,
and
right.
that there is no actual potential benefit or value in applying that.
What was the longest fast while you were there that you were involved with?
40 days.
40 days. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's as long as True North allows.
Right. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too, and it does change your worldview.
So going in there as an RD with your background, especially with the whole sports, which is almost the opposite. It's like feed, recover, perform, feed.
Totally.
What was it like going into True North, and what did you see?
Oh, I've been fascinated with fasting for a long time. Back when like Ramadan fasting was the only kind of fasting that really anybody knew about, and then when intermittent fasting popped up and time restricted feeding and all of these things, it started to catch mainstream, and that was while I was in graduate school. And so to actually see that there was a place where this was allowed, it's sort of like I love to exercise, right? About right now, it's somewhere like an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's really weird for most people. But to then go and hang out with other people who are doing that at like a, training camp or something, you're normalized, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, to be able to go to True North where the way that I was eating already was applauded is pretty cool. Like my blood pressure I was never hanging out at that 120/80, and here at True North they're saying that's actually too high.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, that's really cool. Like that's what I've been saying, but like that's not what we learned in school, right? We learned 120/80 is the goal. So yeah, it was wonderful.
Mine stays at 110/67 or so without exercise.
Don't be proud of that, Raymond.
Well, I'm saying it in a positive way because we have such false securities in these hardcore connections. I'm not saying that exercise doesn't lower your resting pulse rate and doesn't have ability to impact blood pressure, but I believe diet, and it's me speaking to the two dietitians, but the idea is that diet actually has so much more profound impact on one's health than wiggling. So I think swallowing's more important than wiggling.
Oh yeah, of course. We could swallow well and wiggle well and have the best of both worlds, and some synergy probably involved too.
Yeah. So yes,
yeah.
Go ahead.
But before you go on, I just want to tell you. So you and I spoke about this a while ago. I'm telling you've rocked my world a few times. When you were, and I know there's a bit of I'm veering off a bit, but when you were talking before about how does it really make sense to exercise a ton? And you posed it as a question rather than a statement, which I thought
Right.
was appropriate and responsible. But like, it's a great question. You're saying, do we really want to rev up our engines all day long, or not all day long, but rev them up, fuel a huge amount, and it's possible that maybe we actually would do better by slowing down. And I think of turtles, another really long-lived species that are barely moving. And this isn't, again, it's not to say that like no one should move, but is there a benefit for me to maintain an extra 10 or 15 pounds of muscle than I'll ever actually use? Do I actually really need to be able to deadlift 500 pounds for my whole life? And I've been thinking about it where with anything else, sort of the excess is a liability. If I require an extra $1 million just for my own sense of safety and security, then I have to work a lot harder to get that extra $1 million. And what do I need that baggage for? That's years spent doing something that I didn't need to do. If it turns, I mean, it makes sense to have some safety buffer. I don't need to deadlift 500 pounds, but I want to be able to pick up my kids, and I want to be able to, move groceries and luggage and stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. And let's take it one step closer to your family, in that, one of the things you were talking to me about is we were talking about the role of IGF-1 and growing. So you were saying that if my children turn out to be smaller stature because I'm minimizing some of this is not a big issue. Do you remember telling me about that?
Totally.
Yeah.
I absolutely stand by that.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, because that's right. When we're talking about our children, we're talking about what our really core values are.
Totally. Yeah. So I think I mentioned, I don't remember, it was a few years ago now, but that I'm not in a rush to get my kids to grow as fast as they can, to be as big as they possibly can. That if we can slow down the maturation process, that can actually work in their favor. That actually kicking off puberty a little bit later could confer some health advantages, decrease risk of different diseases. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it would make sense to slow that process down, to slow aging from the beginning. Now, it turns out I'm not. No, it's not like I'm trying to stunt my kids' growth.
No,
but it turns out that they're right where they should be in terms of growth curves. Like Cody is set to be. So my 4-year-old, he's on track to be 6 feet tall. Lily's probably more like Karen, my wife. She's probably going to be pretty tiny, like 5'1", maybe. At least if everything stays where it is. But yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense to me to slow the whole process down. What's the rush? It makes, if you're in the wild, you need to become viable fast so that you can run away from a predator fast. But last time I checked, nobody's trying to take down my tots. So
yeah, exactly. And so I think this is important, is that, a lot of general rules of thumb that we've come up with over the last century, especially involving nutrition, and we explained this in last week's episode, really come from this concept of economic deficiency of food. And when you barely have enough, back to your resources, you described, creating too much of a requirement. On the other hand, is obviously if you're at the economic, lower end of that, where you barely have enough food to eat, then each calorie you eat and what is composed of those calories matters a lot more than if you're in a world of relative nutritional excess and you have a lot more flexibility. And I think that, there are places in the world that still are food is economically scarce, or where the economic abundant calorie is not very nutritious. So we do know those examples exist, but for most of us here, this is not the main concern. And I think I applaud what you're talking about, not wanting to make them mature faster than what is normal, because clearly, there's been early puberty in a lot of children, and that's probably due, at least in part, to diet.
Totally. And people ask sometimes, they'll say, what would it take for you to, I don't know, like eat an egg or something like that? And I say a huge amount of scarcity, like for there to be enough risk of undernutrition to the point that would actually serve me, that's where I would do it. And I've actually seen reports of cultures where they'll eat like spider eggs. Like these insect eggs will have about as much protein as a regular egg. And it makes sense to do that, like you're saying, if you actually just can't get enough of these things. And people often ask also in the literature, right? They'll say, how come it seems, I remember there was one study Walter Longo published, it was like 2014, the journal was Cell Metabolism. It got like a huge amount of press coverage, and it showed that lower protein served people until about, I think it was like age 65. And that beyond that, higher protein seemed to help them. And people will say, like, how does that make sense? And it seems to make sense to me. Like, if we become really weak and fragile, and that becomes our weak link, right? That we're going to suffer a hip fracture, immobilize, and die of pneumonia, then we need to be a bit more anabolic. But I think that can also be prevented. It's not like you need to do that, by pounding steaks. It could be by eating lots of beans throughout your life. And there's also research looking at that too, right? That there was one study, I think I'm almost like directly quoting the title, is something like legumes, the greatest predictor of dietary survival in adults of different ethnicities, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't wait until we've really run out of,
we're on the decline.
Yeah.
And another thing to think about is that one of the other sort of confounding factors in using protein, carbs, and fat the way they've done in that study and in many studies is that it may turn out that because those things that people consider proteins, i.e. things that would have in a normal omnivorous diet, those things that would have skewed the data so that that's positive, they also happen to be relatively energy dense. And when people are elderly and their appetite starts to naturally fall, if they're erring on sides of things that are relatively energy dense, that might also explain some of the differences, because they would classify it that way. They would classify meat and things as a protein, and yet it doesn't mean that one necessarily has to eat excess of those essential amino acids.
Because when we see that in not only the elderly, when you see any kind of circumstances where there's a concern for enough quote unquote protein, it's almost always in the same package as just not getting enough energy. So same with, anorexia or an eating disorder or severe malnutrition, they're always packaged together, almost always. I don't like to say always, but.
Yeah. And I think that if we start looking at food more along the ideas of the food triangle, where we're actually segregating food the way it naturally segregates nutrition, I believe that it would probably be more clear about what to eat. And right now, I feel like we've just this macro confusion, this obsession with macronutrients is causing a little confusion and obfuscation of what is really out there. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true, David, that if a person is very healthy and eating healthfully all the way into their elderly age, and they're eating even if it's a plant-based diet, even if it is a diet that's limited in protein, but not deficient, the chances are is they're going to be doing just fine.
Agreed completely. And if anything, the restriction actually helps, so that by the time they get there, they have no chronic disease, and so they're actually set up really well. I've actually been trying to restrict, you're talking about amino acids. I've been personally trying to restrict leucine, trying to restrict methionine, to see the other essential amino acids. It's really, really hard to get those down below these estimated average requirements. And I'm actively trying to do it because of some of the research that I'm reading.
Yeah. And I would say for the people listening here, if you could imagine David's plate at True North. So David is very, very fit. He's the athlete, just ripped. And he would have these amazing True North piles, I used to call them, these piles of starchy foods, etc. And what was really fun about this is that when I measured David's resting metabolism weight for what we were doing with mild cold stress, so he's in the fasted state, not extended fasting, but meaning in the morning, it was a first thing measurement. Because his diet is higher in starchy vegetables and fruits, He had a respiratory quotient, or RER. He had that's that scale that we talked about with Kevin that says, are you primarily burning, glucose, or are you primarily burning fat? And a normal person in that fasted state's about 50-50. When we measured Michael Clapper, for example, he was about 50-50. Right where he was supposed to be and his metabolism was where it was supposed to be. But David's actually was skewed. I think it was like 0.91 or something like that, wasn't it, David? It was skewed towards glucose. And as he was watching this happen, he was going, wow, this is really there. And then we put a cold vest on him and we were measuring his response to cold. And sure enough, his respiratory quotient or RER dropped down, so he was burning primarily fat from that cold. In fact, hadn't you started when I got there? Didn't I sort of inspire you and somebody else? I can't remember who it was, but you guys started doing some cold workouts after I got there, right?
Oh, totally. I've been doing it I'm a huge fan of that. So I live in Bend, Oregon, right?
Yes.
And that's Juliana. That's where we met. And I have my garage. I put a gym in my garage. Gym is a generous term for what I have. It's like a bike and a squat rack and a barbell, and that's about it. But so right now it's, I don't know, it's like 18 or 20 degrees. And this morning I worked out when it was,
I didn't know it gets that cold up there.
And I love it.
I didn't know it gets that cold up there.
That's all it is, cold and rainy.
But that cold, 18 degrees.
No, not rainy.
I agree.
It's so nice here. Yeah, this is like, yeah. So I love it. I mean, I train in the cold every day. And I mean, you warm up and before you know it, it's, you're not cold at all. And you look strange because your garage door is open and people are looking through and you got a t-shirt on and they've got like 7 jackets. But yeah, I've been a huge fan of this. At True North, I was doing the same thing. I was training cold stress. I'm a huge fan of that. And I agree with you. When I saw that respiratory, my RER, and seeing how high that was, because I learned in school, right, Juliana, we learned this, right, that you want it to be, you think of people who are super fit and, you're supposed to be burning more fat at lower exercise intensities. So I was thinking like, I'm working out all the time. Of course, my, it's going to be like 0.71 or 0.72 or something like super low. But yeah, we talked about it, right?
Feeding
the whole
quotient.
Notion of,
yeah. So the idea that as we eat, if we're eating something that's, more on the, the glucose side of things, we're going to end up slightly shifting it up or slightly shifting it down if it's fat. And, other than that, the oxidative priority takes over after the meal, and so, this is, it's not surprising. It's just really interesting how it's been twisted in, now it's twisted again in this whole ketogenic diet craze. But before that, it was twisted in the, quote, low carb diet phase, where craze that was going, that I guess is, going on. But I love that. To me, it was really interesting that none of this is a discrepancy from what we learned a century ago. When metabolism was cutting edge science, these guys had a much better handle on how our bodies work and how we respond to food and activity than the average person graduating in biochemistry or physiology or a physician, et cetera. And that's shocking to me that in a century we could actually know less. The data's there. I showed you some of this stuff. It was so surprising as we're reading some of these old things, and it's right there in black and white. And yet that's not what we learn in the sort of generalized summaries. It's kind of a big telephone game of nutrition that would come down to sort of the practical, what you guys would learn in school. How would you guys describe that in terms of nutrition? What you learn versus, because I know the two of you have gone way beyond that.
Well, wait. Let's go back, because I'm so curious about your time at True North and coming from all of that background and then watching what happens with your patients, your clients go through the process. Like I think people would be mind blown if they haven't read some of the literature or the books and documentation of what happens with fasting. But I've personally heard so many stories and I've read so much about the incredible benefits of these longer term fasts. And I would love to know what your experience was coming in there as a dietitian.
Sure. Yeah, it was crazy. It was really, really crazy. To see the most stubborn, high blood sugar, A1Cs through the roof, insulin, like just horrible, horrible blood work reflected in really low quality of life. And then to watch that improve like nothing I'd ever seen ever was, I mean, just the speed of improvement was insane. I couldn't believe it. And Dr. Goldhammer would always joke about how this is like one of the only places a practitioner can come to actually watch their patients truly get well. And it was true. It was absolutely extraordinary. And there's nothing like I'd ever seen before. We didn't learn anything about that in school. Although, you know, there's lots of literature that was already published on it previously, and it's increasing. So for example, I co-authored a case report looking at one of the patients there had a massive debilitating headache. She's a dentist
I know who that
and
person is.
couldn't work anymore. Yeah, she's fantastic. She's been very vocal about
Amazing
her
woman.
story. So I don't feel bad giving any details. Yeah, exactly. She's extraordinary. And just to watch her get her life back it's just incredible, because I spend my time with my head in the books and I'm just
Right.
looking at numbers, right? I see the N of 1062 or whatever. And it's like, okay, but I don't really know what that looks like. So to actually see the face of the person who says they get their life back, and that took like, what, let's say, 40-day fast and several week refeed, like you get to see magic happen there. So I felt like, why hadn't I been
That's
learning
so
about that
cool.
before?
Did you
Like,
do
totally
any
stupid.
longer term fasts yourself personally?
The longest I've ever done was 7 days. I could have done longer. I felt totally fine. I just I did it during I was taking off time from work. I didn't want to take off too much time because it took me a while to feel, to come out of the winter
Did it
and back
change
into the
any of
summer.
what you used when I don't know if are you still consulting with clients? Okay, so did it change any
Yes.
of what you learned
Yeah.
there and all of that application based, so much different than what we learned. Did you change any of your recommendations, or how did that, evolve for you professionally speaking?
So there were a few things that I had. There were a few, I don't know how to put them, but like maybe learning experiences or points of conflict. So for example, when I went into True North, I was originally a bit of a higher dietary fat advocate. So maybe more like Joel Furman recommends than John McDougall, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's the classic paradox.
The
Yeah.
McDougall-Furman paradox.
Yeah.
That's what I used to call
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And so I had some really interesting conversations and looked at new literature. For example, if I was concerned, what if people aren't going to get the omega-3s that they need? And then I started, while I was there, looking at literature, comparing, I think it was like a 40% fat diet versus 20% fat diet, and seeing that when people actually had less fat, they were able to convert more of the fat that they did eat into the essential fats that they needed, the long chain, right, the EPA, DHA. And so stuff like that, again, I wish that I learned this earlier, but that was kind of paradigm shifting to think that sometimes less is more. And then this plays into really everything you guys do and talk about and work on. And, we think about how variety, that was another big thing, is I always thought you got to have a huge amount of variety. And there's some true, it makes sense. If you have more varied foods, you're going to get a good mix of nutrition. But then I see what you guys do with your patients. And I was so proud to see the graphs of one of the patients who I referred to you guys once my Game Changers work started picking up, and I couldn't work with her anymore.
She's one of our superstar clients
Yeah.
too. You got to see how she finished up, right? Just amazing.
She did amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
Incredible, with a good amount of restriction. She's in the beginning, right? She's kicking it off with one food. And fasting is obviously zero foods. And yeah, just to see, so that's another thing that shook it up for me, is just the notion of variety, and that if we have more variety, then more foods appeal to us, right? So, like sensory specific satiety, if I have 10 foods available to me, I'm going to end up eating more of them than if I just have one. You guys are the masters of this. So those sorts of things kind of trickled into my brain largely during that process. And yeah, I think I learned more gray area as opposed to just, the basics of this is good, this is bad. It's more like quality can matter, and it's not just protein, like you guys say. It's not just protein. It's the quality of it, and it's the amino acids that make it up. And so maybe we should, sort of appreciate the finer details here.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to put all this stuff together. And I mean, even contextually in what's going on right now in our world, where people are really kind of panicked about not having enough food for the first time, I think, in our generation, right? Like, people really didn't think about this was going to happen again.
Well, they always, when it snows, they go for eggs, bread, and milk, and I always say, I don't need any of those three things. There's never a run on Brussels sprouts, which is really kind of great. So,
Yep.
I went to the store today. We're right in the middle of all this stuff, but I went to the store today, and all the amazing foods that we love to eat are just there in abundance. Maybe I don't know. There seems to be this false connection with toilet paper and disease. But other than that, there seems to be, abundance. And even if, I think short term, if there are supply issues, I don't think it's going to be a long-term issue for people.
But that's what I was going to say.
But they're worried.
But what I was going to say is that maybe this is kind of, I tweeted that maybe this is kind of like an excuse to go into metabolic winter, and maybe it's okay to eat a little bit less and to just, we have to stay put a little bit more. And all of that might be just kind of like an imposed, a good thing, like a silver lining.
And certainly it can't hurt, really sort of segue into another subject. It can't hurt that, we eat a diet that has a better immune response. Our immunity is in better shape. I did get a fever this year, interestingly enough, in Thailand. But anyway, the idea here, I haven't been sick in 10 years at all. I've not really been sick, not one time since I started my plant-based diet. I mean, occasionally I'll get a little sniffle or something like that. But other than that, I haven't been sick in 10 years. And I think part of that has to be eating a better diet. Of course, obviously, it probably helps that I'm healthier now than I was a decade ago. But surely eating this way has to be some benefit for people that are out there that are concerned.
Right. Except I'm very hesitant to say anything. There's people saying, if you eat only meat, you're going to have a better immune system. Forget the plants. And there's other people saying, take this supplement, it'll save you. Or, there's no way for us to say that. But overall, this is a very anti-inflammatory way of eating when we're eating to the right of the triangle. And, that's good. And eating less, giving your body time to do all the metabolic house cleaning is good. So there's definitely benefits.
Actually, I take that back. I did get a fever in 2010. And the reason I know is because it was right before I bought my real calorimeter. And I had made a calorimeter out of oxygen and CO2 sensors and a small little data acquisition system, because that's all I could do at the time. And I got a fever, and I was so excited because I actually tracked my CO2 going up as my temperature was going up. I was measuring it, and as my fever increased, the percentage change perfectly matched what fevers are projected to increase in terms of your metabolic rate. So, I guess the good news is, if you get a good fever and you're not going to die, the great news is, hey man, it's a great time to, you don't need to eat a lot, right? We're the only species that force feeds our sick. If you think about this, other animals, normally they lose their appetite. And this goes right back into the stuff that David was talking about in fasting, in terms about someone fasts and they actually paradoxically have better response. But the point is, we force feed our sick, but the fact of the matter is, it's a great time. I guess if you have a little extra calories, you can always have a little higher metabolism and burn that fat.
I know.
Yeah.
I know someone that's sick right now and she's counting off how many pounds she's losing. I mean, hey, there's always a bright side.
Exactly. So
David, then you jumped into Game Changers and this is...
wait.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. There's just like so many things you guys were talking about. I want to
Yeah.
Go for it.
Go.
So a few things. One is we're talking about, is it okay to take this opportunity to go into this metabolic winter? And I think about this all the time. And so I have lots of different N of 1 experiments that I play on myself. And right now I happen to be at I've been dancing my way all the way down to a pretty low body fat. Right now it's around like 6.5%. And
dang,
yeah,
that's legit, David.
I know. I'm pretty pumped about it. I like it. I mean, I'll get it back again. It'll bump up again when I run my next experiment. But I was thinking, like, what if we really had no access to food? Maybe I shouldn't have run this experiment just yet. And then I think even at like a mid single digit body fat percent, I still have tons of excess.
So let's just do that math real quick. If you're at 6%, what is your weight right now?
What is it, like 180?
That's 10 pounds or 37,800 calories.
That'll last a while.
Yeah.
Wait, how did you get, what's this experiment? Pray tell, we all want to know. What you doing over there in Bend, Oregon?
So I've been doing
it's like 25 days worth of body fat if you think about it. And I used a number because I kind of know where your metabolism was even then. Your basal, you'd have to relax. You'd have to not be wiggling too much, right? But then you add to that, and we'll talk about the food, but you add to that, some of the, the kinds of staples that are easy to keep around. And the fact is, you're going to be just fine.
Totally. And I had the same experience that you had when you go to the grocery store and you see all of the, bread is gone, right? Like people are taking the cans of like, I don't know, every single thing that I could want is still there, and tons of it. And it's funny to me because like that's exactly what I'd want to have. And so there's a company I order from. You guys have heard of Leafside, I'm sure.
No, actually, no.
Oh, check it out. The website's goleafside.com. I'm not trying to give them a free promo or anything, but I'm just saying they make SOS free. Damn. I don't know. Maybe that's not cool. Maybe it is.
No, it's great. It's fine. We use VitaCost is the one we've been using.
That's just a
VitaCost.
website. No, that's different.
Cool. So Leafside make a SOS free, like salt, oil, sugar free, or you can get it with whatever salt but they make an SOS free freeze dried packet of food. I take this when I go traveling, and I have like a box of them. And I also think if things went real bad, I could still eat the quality of diet that I want to eat. Each one of these packets is like 600 calories of like whole food basically. And so I play out these scenarios in my mind. And then I also think, we're talking about metabolic winter, I think about the kids and I think, okay, well, they still need to grow. So I would definitely give them like everything that they need. And Karen is like 100 pounds, 105 pounds. So I'd give her next. And I think it's kind of a cool thought to think, even at a lower body fat percent, I can still give them what they would need. And I could not actually take the hit. Like, I would do just fine. And going back to what sort of things I learned at True North, if 7 days without any food was really not a big deal, like this just doesn't faze me at all. I guess I just feel more resilient. And it would take a higher level of stressor to really make me lose sleep.
Well, I'm certainly not in single digit fats, I can assure you. And right now, I know that if I didn't have to eat for the next 30 days, I'd be just fine. I wanted to go longer back in the 24 day when I did that one. And I hated that I had to stop like 6 days short of just having 30. I don't know, for some reason it feels like a kind of a failed opportunity or whatever, but I know it's still 24 is a long time. But it is a really great feeling once you're free from this idea that there is actually this crisis measured in minutes, hours, or even days. I mean, once you know that the real biology. I mean, things can be socially extreme that aren't biologically extreme. And I think this is a really good example because it's not biologically extreme to, be 7 days and just not have an opportunity to eat. We can imagine that sort of situation playing out in history, but it's socially extreme. So, but I think it's really feels good when you're going through these real scenarios in your mind. I think it feels really good when okay, it'd be fine. We're not telling everybody they need to hunker down and not eat for the next 3 or 4 weeks, but the fact that you know confidently, like it's sort of that visceral feeling of saying, I know I'll be just fine. I think that's a real reassuring position to be.
I think so too. It's like it removes a lot of the stress and allows this to be more of an observational process than feeling quite so personally invested. I mean, I definitely care about other people who are going through hardship, but it allows me to take myself out of the equation. Like, what am I going to do for me? Like, no, I can just focus on other people. And it's actually kind of cool to think if my neighbors came and knocked on my door and said, hey, do you have any extra food? Even if we didn't, it would still feel really good to be able to give them even my ration because they don't realize what their body's capable of. I know what my body's capable of. I know that I can fast. They don't have any idea that they can, or maybe they're taking medication and they can't. But it gives you kind of feel like you have superpowers a little bit.
Very empowering.
And I think there's a direct translation to being very physically fit and athletic. One of the things that I think a lot of people know that do long-term runs, long-term hikes, etc., they have that same sense of performance in another way. So we tend to celebrate that in society. The idea that I think a lot of times you fit, if I had to climb this, these stairs, or if I had to climb this building, or if I had to climb this wall, or I had to, walk this far because the car was broken down and I needed to go get help. Those kinds of understanding what you're capable of in those kinds of scenarios really is an important part. And I really think that, to take this one step further and, link it back to what we were just talking about food availability and the diet that the three of us eat, all of these foods are very shelf stable. I mean, you can store if you wanted to be a plant prepper, you can have an enormous amount of dry beans stored. You can have an enormous amount of rice or other kinds of grains. It's really not that difficult to eat. And most of the things people might worry about, I would imagine a lot of our friends who aren't plant-based, they really might believe, hey, I'm not getting protein because I don't have an egg. I'm not getting protein, or I need to have tuna fish and I need to have this. And a lot of these things are the foods that actually spoil the easiest. I mean, really, it's a lot easier to eat in a plant-based side. Obviously, leafy greens and fresh vegetables are
Yeah,
in
I
that.
mean, this takes away a lot of the anxiety. I mean, I always stock up. Like, I'm like this all the time. I'm a plant prepper, I guess you can call me. But I always have frozen fruits and vegetables and frozen grains, and I also always have dried rice or grains and legumes and canned and all that stuff. Like, you could always make something in my place. It's always well stocked.
She is a plant prepper.
Like, it's kind of nice to have. Now I'm kind of more normal. Today, no one's laughing at me today. But okay, wait. But back, David, I still want to know what your experiment was. Oh. I'm not going to let that go.
I'll totally tell you. I also want to talk, because we were just talking about immune function too.
Oh, yeah.
So I also just want to touch on that, but we can do whatever order you guys want to do. But I just wanted to share, just because I actually, Ray, when you mentioned some of the things we might touch on today, I thought it was kind of cool. There was a paper I was reading that I wanted to drop a quote from it, because Juliana, like you said, a lot of this is speculative, right? Like, I think was it Paul Saladino, the medical doctor, the carnivore diet guy, who was saying if you just eat only meat, somehow that'll keep you safe from the coronavirus. And like you said, people they'll say things that, that are really just not substantiated with the evidence.
And dangerous. I would say dangerous too.
Yeah.
A lot of things I'm hearing. Yeah.
Totally. So I just wanted to share a few things that I'd come across on that front, because we're saying, is it possible that a whole food plant-based diet would be protective against, infection? So I just want to drop a quote. I was literally reading this yesterday. There's a 2019 paper from the journal Nutrients. This was a metabolomics study, and they wrote this. They wrote, ingestion of fruits high in carbohydrates, polyphenols, and metabolites effectively supports performance with added benefits, including enhancement of oxidative and antiviral capacity through fruit metabolites and increased plasma levels of gut-derived phenolics. So I understand this is, it's not where the rubber meets the road, but I do want to just throw out that when we're talking about what kind of diet could be protective, and here they're talking about plants and their constituents having a protective effect. For me, that added to, I read a while back, some really interesting research, because, I work with athletes almost exclusively at this point. I remember looking at research of marathon runners eating beta glucan, right, a fiber in nutritional yeast, and seeing that, when you really stress people out, have them, run a marathon, they can, obviously their risk of upper respiratory tract infection goes up. They took like very, very little bit of beta glucan. It's like a spoonful of nutritional yeast a day, and they cut their rate of infection, of upper respiratory tract infection, in half. They felt better.
That's
they had more energy. Yeah, and in kids too. I think about it with kids, right? I've seen randomized control trial kids for 3 months also taking nutritional yeast. It was much less for these kids, and it dropped their illness rates by like 2/3. So that's just one example of how, obviously, that is where the rubber meets the road. You're seeing what actually happens when you give people a fiber found in plants, and you can see it actually does sort of improve resilience. I've seen the same thing with fruits and vegetables, just in terms of more people, the more fruits and vegetables people are eating, they have fewer respiratory tract infections. I saw the same thing with pregnant women. But you have to, it's seen in that study, they had to get super high. They got like, compared to the normal person, it was like 8 or 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day to have that protective effect.
Which is the recommendation anyway. I like the 10 servings a day recommendation because of all these benefits.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think what's really interesting here is, this is really we're getting hit on both sides of this, because you have this group of people that are, promoting this excess amino acid, idea. And then of course they generalize it into, quote, protein. And then people become, where they're seeking all this extra protein. And the other side of this,
the pursuit of protein, I like to call it.
The other side of this, which is equally as damning, is the idea that they've now also conflated refined sugar and the kinds of foods that are made with refined sugar with, now a generalized glucophobia. And then now we're restricting whole food, starchy vegetables and fruits out of fear of excess glucose. And this becomes, I think, two sides of this problem, because they're missing out on lots of these other phytonutrients. Never mind, lectins, all the other things that end up coming up as creating fears. But I think, there's ample evidence that says, people adding more starchy vegetables and fruits to their diet is not going to cause them to be less healthy.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%.
So, but it's really great to see that, that even in this case that these work, and it works all the way around. It works because we're talking about shelf-stable foods that are easy, just easy to prepare. The fact that, we don't need to eat as much as we believe we need to eat, especially during these times, that we can do that, we are getting other kinds of nutrition. You talked about the polyphenols there and the other phytonutrients that are part of, clearly a part of what we've seen in activating the sirtuins and some of the other elements of longevity. And, we're not eating the food that's most likely contaminated. I mean, I don't know who pooped on my lettuce, but it didn't, even those kinds of, lettuce scares didn't come from the fact that the lettuce naturally has, what's normally the contaminant. It's not
E. coli.
Yeah. E. coli, So it's all the way around. This becomes a really great solution if this is what you're primarily eating. You just don't have to worry. Right now I don't have any concerns of running out of food at all, and I'm not an overly plant prepper, but I still, even if I were prepping, I could probably last way longer, a combination of just not eating as often and using those fat stores. I got some extra ones on you, so I could maybe go longer than you can do. But the point is, we could. I think this is a really great opportunity to talk about this in this bigger context, and you're putting it in that bigger context of your family or your neighbors, et cetera. And during these kinds of situations, I think that's where we do best as societies, is we tend to come together when the hurricane hits or the fires strike or the tornado ravages, and this is actually one that shouldn't be any different.
I'm with you. And I also think, I was actually just thinking when you were saying, you could eat less food during this time and you do great. And now I think about how people are snatching up the toilet paper, how the good news is you wouldn't even need as much of that.
Yeah. I had no bowel movements during my fast. That's actually kind of the wonderful thing too. It's like, you just don't, no issue there. Exactly.
Environmentally sustainable, including current events.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So were there any other those back subjects that you wanted to touch on before we moved on?
Oh, no, I just wanted to, just because we were talking about immune function, and like I said, I was just,
That's
I
great.
remember having come across some of that.
So in your role at Game Changers, let's talk a little bit for people, because this is sort of that inside peek. We also had James on here too. And so let's talk a little bit of an inside peek, because what's really great is before you got that position, in fact, and you and I talked right after you got that position when it was still kind of hush hush, but in terms of, we talked amongst ourselves about some of the other documentaries that are out there, and where you and I are both really into trying to dot every I and cross every T. You tend to be like Juliana and I, very thorough and not want to, generalize too much. So as you were going through this, talk a little bit about how that process rolled out, where you would, I'm sure there's times when you had to say, I'm not sure we can completely say this or that. Like, you guys went to a great length, and James very much encouraged you to go to a great length to try to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
So
For sure.
Talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. So I think anyone can just find a certain study that says what it is they are looking to express. For any topic that we would get into, I would do a massive review of literature. It would take a huge amount of time to do. And then I'd bullet point the summary, and then I would hand that over to the rest of my team so they could see where does any given study that we are going to include in the film, where does that fall on that spectrum? And that way, the bigger picture was visible. So that was a really fun process, learning about a bunch of things. I mean, I had already known, for example, like a low carb diet. I already knew where that would end up. But it was a great opportunity to look at it with fresh eyes and see more recent papers than the last time I had reviewed the subject, and just plot it all along and then share that information. And then the team could figure out, what is it that we want to use? We obviously can't, put all of the studies up on the screen. I was thrilled that they were interested in putting all of the ones that we did, and then to have the references in there. And we had a paper, Juliana, that you had written, which I loved, in the Kaiser, in the Permanente journal.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was so good. I mean, I've referred back to that a billion times.
Aww.
And by the way, just also mentioning that, Ray, your oxidative priority. Did you do that together?
We didn't
No.
do that one together. We did the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology together.
Yeah, I love that one too. They were both really good. But anyway, yeah, so just the fact that we were including them on the screen, I think that that's really important, because otherwise, how are you supposed to I don't know. I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't trust anyone who isn't sharing the source of the information. And so I love that they were game to do that. I didn't even get any pushback on it. So anyway, that's what I did was sort of map out the lay of the land, and then we would pick studies that were representative.
Yeah, and I like this about you because I know you personally, and we've gone through this, and we've done this on more than one occasion. You'll text me, or we'll call, or whatever. We both like to go through and look at both sides, and neither one of us is afraid of being wrong. Which there's a lot of people that I know that are researchers that they really don't like that very much. I mean, I'm not saying that we celebrate and say, hey, yeah, I'm wrong about everything. I'm saying that when something challenges a worldview, we both get excited, and you get excited. Juliana was like this too when I first met her. The idea that she was excited about something that was, wait a minute, what did you tell me? And she went, oh, so tell me more about this. Like, let's go into this. I want to understand. Well, wait, and you do the same exact thing. And so as I knowing that this was the case with this movie, it was really good to good feeling for me knowing that you were sort of at the helm there, and just looking at, I think what was really amazing also, and I know you were somewhat involved in this, but James really has done a great job at talking about this publicly. When he was on Joe Rogan, he really hung with it, on long enough. He hung with it long enough to really get Joe to stop and think about this in a different way. And I don't really want to talk about winning and losing in that perspective, because I just felt like he did a great job at putting certain positions forward and getting people to open up and say, wait a minute, this absolutely isn't exactly as we've been saying. And I mean, you were obviously involved in some of that. So how was it from that perspective in the public relations after the movie, going out there and sort of, I don't want to call it defending, but we'll just call it defending the movie when people were challenging things? Was that something you've spent a lot of time or had some really interesting stories in doing?
So whenever someone would write up a critique and it would get circulated, and I would end up with like 50 emails, when the Men's Health rebuttal came out, or when Lane Norton wrote something. And so every single time one of these things comes through, at least for the first couple months after the film came out, I would go through the actual critique, and I'd go through point by point and see what, if any of this holds water. And after a very, very, very short period of time, I just saw the same things getting recycled. And I have to say, I don't think it was great for my soul to just constantly see these things, especially because there were so many people who were so excited about it. They recognized the value, and they were interested. They were saying, okay, cool, sign me up. Like, what do I do now? And so we can spend our time playing defense, or we can take advantage of this momentum and now just protect against recidivism. And
Right.
To me, the latter is much more inspiring. There's an unlimited number of people who will take up our time, trying to nitpick the little details of this, and they sort of miss the forest for the trees. I'm sorry, the trees for the forest. I don't know. Whatever. They miss the important piece of the puzzle.
I think it's the
And
forest
I
for
just,
the trees. Yeah.
yeah, forest for the trees. Cool. I feel like that to me is much more inspiring, to see the huge amount of interest that these pro athletes have, that people in the military, that regular gym goers, that part really inspires me. In terms of mounting defenses, I have to be honest with you, there has not been one criticism that I've seen of the film so far that I didn't anticipate. And sometimes, we needed to simplify things to convey them so that people who don't have scientific backgrounds could digest it.
Yep.
And so
You and I talked about this on more than one occasion.
Yeah,
during that whole
exactly.
process, you and I had these discussions of, the difficulties, and you have to speak to people and meet them where they are. And what you're
Totally.
really generally talking about is what we say all the time here: is be a lighthouse, not a tugboat. You don't. I mean, trying to convince people, you can put information out there and people can react. And I think you're exactly right to focus on that. I don't care how anybody eats. I'm just saying, if anybody wants our help, this is what we really want you to do, and the results are typical. You're going to see these. We don't have to disclaim our results because you'll get similar results. I have no doubt that someone, if they allow us to control what they eat, they're going to lose weight, and they're going to lose weight at 0.6 to 0.8 pounds a day. It's going to be about the same they would lose as they were fasting, and they don't need to fast. So to me, that feels so confident. I feel confident in the same way I hear in your voice about, yeah, there's some criticisms because we had to overly simplify a few things, but you can't need a graduate degree to talk about, the kitchen. And this is one of our problems with macro confusion. Everybody's made it so complicated and technical that you can't even have a normal conversation that involves vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. It's like at a certain point, it just becomes important to communicate the information. And even if the little technical pieces, like discussing that this diet decreased inflammation versus this diet decreased inflammatory markers. Like just that one discrepancy. If we say inflammation, well, technically it's an inflammatory marker.
Right.
Yes.
But if you say inflammatory marker, now people are like, well, what, or measures of inflammation. There's an extra fraction of a second that goes into it and a bit of a head scratch. And so, yes, it's not technically like 100% dialed in, but did we really miss any of the heart of that message? Or actually, to share what we talked about before, Ray, about all protein comes from plants. Well, mushrooms are not technically plants, and then there's bacteria, but like for all intents and purposes.
Or my criticism of that, which is really protein comes from your ribosomes, end of story. The only thing comes from, what you ingest, whether it's flesh or mushrooms or whatever, are the amino acids, and it's really only 9 of those amino acids, and the other ones, we end up manufacturing. Even some of those, or some of the essential or indispensable, are also conditionally indispensable and essential, and they aren't even needed later in life. Like for example, taurine. So the point here is that, when someone says, and I agree, when someone says, all protein comes from plants, I hear that as tremendously inaccurate, because this is just the idea that somehow we get this. But I say something very different, which is every whole food plant has every amino acid. Every whole food plant food has every amino acid, and I'm not saying that it has high concentrations, back to when you were talking about, limiting methionine or limiting, leucine. The idea is that it actually becomes difficult to eat enough food and then end up limiting some of these things to the level you want to. But the point here is that the concept that the general population has, that somehow these 9 amino acids that happen to have a higher concentration in animal products because they're farther up the food chain and animals tend to concentrate nutrition instead of creating it. The idea that those somehow are deficient, that no plant has them. This is the whole crazy complete protein, psychobabble, right? And the fact is that, so that would be like a criticism, that we talked about, is like, I hate when people use the word protein, but I understand that people don't necessarily understand the amino acids, which is why I really want people speaking about them more. I want people talking about that, that symphony, or that, that Wheel of Fortune by a vowel, kind of concept of the 20 letters of our protein alphabet. I want people to understand at that level that it's not a crisis, and you really don't have to manage it.
Right. For sure. And trying to get to that nuance. See, I'd love to have done that. And by the way, I'm with you completely.
Yeah.
That the notion of amino acids, the popularization of the word protein, I should say, is unproductive.
Yeah.
And it's so common, and people really don't know what they're talking about when they ask if you're getting enough. They don't really know, because then you can just say, well, how much is enough? Like, well,
And nobody knows the answer to that question.
And of course, right after that, carb and fat is just as misleading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now once we introduce those three words and say, yeah, but we got to group them somehow. So let's put these three technical terms in it. Yeah, but that's not enough. Now we got to know are they, complex carbohydrate or simple?
Monounsaturated fat.
Are they, yeah. So we end up with all of this absolutely crazy language. And it's like, come on, can't we just talk about eating right on the food triangle? Can't we say, go grab some bok choy? If we talk about food, we get there. So it must have been insanely frustrating at times to know that you have to make these decisions, and then to see a critique with somebody who should have been objective, as I was when I made the critique. Remember when I said about that line, you pulled that one up. That is when I specifically said that makes me just cringe. And I told you why, but I also in the same breath said, I get what you're trying to do, but boy, that makes it just makes my
same here.
Same
here. I mean, really, if you think about it, I agree with you 1,000,000,000%. Now so we said all protein comes from plants. Imagine if we said all amino acids come from ribosomes.
Well, they don't. So that would be wrong. But you would say all protein comes from ribosomes would be correct. And then you would say that all of the dietary essential amino acids originate in plants. That would be a very accurate statement, or bacteria or fungus.
Right. Either. So we can, right, no matter how we
But it's complicated. Like it's complicated because then you got to tell them what an amino acid is. And they barely know. Not only do they not know what a protein is, they think they do. It's even worse when you're dealing with someone who believes they understand something and they don't. It's much more difficult. It's much more difficult for me to teach someone circulation in a swimming pool and how how fluid dynamics works if they're just a layperson than if they're actually a swimming pool builder, because they have all these rules that they believe are true, and it takes a lot to make them unlearn that. And I think you guys as personal trainer, isn't there a direct analogy there when you have someone come in that believes they know about working out in a certain way and they're doing something wrong? It's harder to get them to undo something than to teach them right the first time?
I mean, you have to speak to people in their language, and that's applicable across the board. And when you're taking it to the big screen and you're having to generalize, you have to speak to, a very common denominator type of language. So it's applicable everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, by the way, the biggest unsung hero of the movie, of the Game Changers, is I don't know if you've met or come across Joseph Pace. He gets that way of relating to people. He understands the terms people will get, the terms they won't understand, and he can relate to people in a way that I haven't seen really anyone be able to do. And so he could, we would work together, and he would take these really complex concepts and distill them into really bite-sized chunks that people could digest. And that was as magical as any piece of this whole working experience, because you could have great information, but if you're presenting it in a way that people can't assimilate, then what was the point?
Then what's the point? And you guys did such a good job of that, of communicating it, because as evidenced by the explosion of inspiration. And I think that was hopefully, I can't read, know the intention, but it seems like that was a goal. It's usually a goal is to inspire and just to show people what's possible. And I really believe, and I've seen that movie, the movie really did that. There was a lot of people that were like, wow, that's actually, I never thought about that. And it kind of spoke to a population that really hasn't been touched in that way from this advantage point. And I just was really grateful for this because, me too, I come from the same background as you with the personal training and the, sports nutrition and all that. And just so much mythology, I think, is particularly strong in the sports nutrition world. And this just kind of broke a lot of barriers. It piqued a lot of people's interest. You spoke to them in a language that they were excited about, and it was doable, and they wanted to start. And I mean, we had a flood of people coming to us. I want to go plant-based. What do I do? Which is like amazing, right? How it doesn't get any better than that. Like we need inspiration out there.
Yeah, we had Dr. Kathy Naughton on, who's a urologist that specializes in sexual dysfunction. And she was talking about how this opened up the conversations a lot for her,
right?
Because she's really a plant-based advocate, and this is something she sort of stumbled into, and now she's a real advocate. She went on one of our recent retreats, and we had her on our podcast a few episodes ago. But at the same time, combining what she was talking about and what we listened to her in terms of watching the movie, and James, really that part of erection and erectile dysfunction. He talked about some of the controversy or some of the, the debate back and forth about, do we use that or do we use something else? And, it really opened up the communication to a whole group of people that, weren't really necessarily in your market that you thought you were going to hit. You wanted to hit them, but, guys think about this, guys worry about this. And so, they paid attention, and it was really, I think it was, that was a game-changing scene in the Game Changer movie. I as soon as that scene went by, the first time I saw it, as soon as that scene went by, I looked at Juliana and I said, that right there is going to get so much play, and it's fantastic. It's just fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, that was incredible. That was an amazing experience, being able to work on that. And
did you guys expect that much results from your perspective? Were you knowing that this was going on before it actually happened, that test?
So, we figured out exactly how to run that test, and which, obviously you want to make as even. What's the word? You want to sort of match the nutritional value of each of these meals to the best of your ability. So, for example, we didn't have it be so that any of the meals would have too few essential amino acids to maximize muscle protein synthesis. So, it's not like we were going to make it so that everything was mismatched. So
right, because it wasn't even the best. It wasn't even the best case. Because it wasn't the best case comparison. Meaning, you could probably have had a meal that got even better results for that particular
we were
test.
Conservative. We were very conservative. Yeah, and so I knew from looking at the research on flow-mediated dilation, to see how much blood flow is going through arteries, what sorts of results are likely from these kinds of, from giving people different meals and seeing what happens. I don't believe there had ever been, any investigation into that particular topic. I mean, we know that the canary in the coal mine for heart disease is often erectile dysfunction in men. So, we knew that there was going to be the potential for a greater effect size when we're looking there specifically. But no, I mean, that was pretty incredible to see that size of results. Now, it doesn't blow my mind that was the case. It seems like, it seems logical that would happen. But yeah, I think we were all like, wow, that was pretty incredible.
So I can't let you get away, or I'll be in trouble. But I can't let you get away with. So what was your challenge? We got off topic again. What was your challenge that landed you at 6% body fat? Because we got off topic on all these other fascinating things that were great. And Juliana is looking at me saying, we didn't get back to that challenge, so we got to do that. She wants to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, I know everyone else does too.
Sure. So
it's the cliffhanger now.
So I do this kind of thing regularly, right? Where my weight will go anywhere from about 212 pounds down to like maybe 175, and then I'll just recycle it and kind of go back up and down. I know that's a big fluctuation. I know that probably seems crazy, but I'm vibing with your guys' metabolic winter hypothesis, that whole concept of, and I try to do this seasonally. So you can see, I mean, it's winter, and so my weight is down, and it seems like that would be a normal thing to happen before the spring. So I kind of get off on this seasonal variation. And so that's why I was just saying each, I wouldn't say every year, but many years I'll do this dance. This particular one had to do with refeeding. How often, basically, does it make more sense to just maintain the same calorie deficit day in, day out? Or does it make sense across the whole week to maintain, the same calorie deficit, but sort of staggering it so that some days are higher calorie and some days are lower calorie? And then the ironic thing is, I want to say in the last week or two, a paper was actually published exactly on this. And that kind of annoyed me because I was like,
"What's the paper?"
I don't
gotta let us know.
Yeah, I can definitely tell it to you. But they literally did exactly this, where they refed people on the weekends, and they ended up with, I think it was better body composition.
So I have a sheet that I want to send to you about. The measurements, because about the body composition, it would be curious that as you're going up and down in body weight and body fat, as you age, this is more of a long game kind of thing, but as you age, most people have this sort of first on, last off, meaning, the first fat they put on is sort of the last they lose. And so a lot of times with our clients, the body part that they're most worried about is normally sort of the last place where they lose that body fat because they've been thinking about it the longest. But I'd be curious, as you're going up and down with this thing, and then getting back to this, the paper, but as you're going up and down, if how you're laying down body fat, because I know you to be this very lean guy, so it'd be interesting to know how that rides up and down.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be pretty cool to see. I mean, this is where I wish I could get better than an N of 1 in this kind of thing. But like you said, first on, last off?
Yeah, first on, last off, yeah. That's the way I look at it, is like rings on a tree. So, we see, when we look at and talk to our clients, we say, imagine yourself as your 5 little cylinders with a little sphere on the top, right? So the question is it, are you worried about your little fat cylinder arms or fat cylinder legs, or the mid cylinder, so it turns out that one place there is a lot of variability is not what someone's metabolism and not how fast they're burning body fat, but rather where that body fat comes off of first. So, these kinds of people who tend to all be the, athletic type or the fitness model type that, want to have their 6-pack or their 8-pack or whatever, it may turn out that they are just selected for, because those of us that put that abdominal, and I'm not talking about visceral fat, but that abdominal adiposity on a little first, where they may put some on their legs or on their arms, which actually adds to the illusion of a bulk. So because I do that my legs, and I know that for sure, my legs don't really get fat. They stay relatively lean. So, how you put that on, the order by which you put that on obviously is going to change gender wise, because women tend to put that on in hips and thighs, which is great for carrying a pregnancy through the winter. You get pregnant in the middle of, when fecundity is the highest, when food is the highest in the middle of the summer, right? At the highest, the longest photo period. And then that child is born, in the early spring, when food is coming up in energy, and they're, in that last trimester working on those last, that last energy stores, going back to a time before, In-N-Out Burger, they that's where that calorie restriction would happen. And, it only takes around 540 or so extra calories a day for that third trimester. And so having that stored there is a very relatively safe place to do it. So the idea that, just like Michael Phelps was self-selected for, certain characteristics to be able to swim well, and he stayed in the sport, whereas someone who got involved in swimming that didn't have those adaptations, his wingspan and, the ratios, they did some computational fluid dynamics on the shape of his body, especially with swim skins, which I was remotely involved in only because I was doing another collaboration with a researcher at the same time using the Fluent software and computational fluid dynamics, but it was for circulation. So I was just an observer to what they were doing. But the idea that we don't, the people who rise to the top are also people that do really well. And that could be music ability, it could be artists, et cetera, and on and on. And so the idea that we have very individualistic ways that we lay down body fat and that we eliminate that body fat, and both of you guys, obviously, as, trainers, abs are made in the kitchen, right? You guys would have said that probably, 1,000 times before this conversation, that, it's not, you're not going to just go do a bunch of sit-ups and have abs, everybody has them. You just can't see them, So anyway, I just think that's an important part of doing that, is knowing how your body does. And by the way, this N of 1 is one where it's really important. You don't need an N of many to know that if you strike your thumb with a hammer, that it's going to hurt. And this is about, these kinds of N of 1s are actually great because we can measure them, and they are repeatable on our own body. We become our own control, and when you want to know it on yourself, so it would be interesting to take those kinds of measurements as you go up and down to see that as you age, does that adiposity start, getting distributed or laid down in a different place first?
Yeah, I would think so. Or by the way, I have the study for you.
Good.
It's called Intermittent Energy Restriction Attenuates the Loss of Fat-Free Mass in Resistance-Trained Individuals, a randomized control trial. And the author, the primary author is first, his name is Campbell, Bill Campbell.
Great.
And this was just published March 8th of this year. So just like a week ago.
Send us the link.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's
Thanks.
right. Cool. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's interesting. I also remember learning about this.
I found it.
In grad. Oh, you got it?
Yeah,
I remember in grad school learning about HIV lipodystrophy and seeing.
That's right.
You remember that?
Yes.
So, right, you store more, was it more visceral fat, and also on the back of the neck, and how it sort of moves away from the limbs. And it's fascinating to see. And I remember, right, we were learning about lipoprotein lipase and hormone sensitive lipase, and what could possibly be causing, what causes us to, like you're saying, to lose more in certain areas first and put back in other areas. And yeah, I think the whole area is really interesting. And if I could, yeah, I would totally just exclusively put fat on my biceps. I feel like that would be.
Or your forearms. You could be Popeye.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So this has been fantastic having this conversation. We need to come back to this again. I think we probably, at some point, it would be great to work through some of these papers and pick like 2 or 3 of them and actually work through them and let someone hear us all dig down through, or just listen to you go through one, because I love talking to you about this. So we've had so much fun and spent so many hours going through all this, and I really miss the fact that we had every single day for almost a month and really I was there for a little bit longer, but with the refeed, but all that time that we had, it was just such a fantastic opportunity for me in my life, and great to have you there, because I had this really, this person that was such a geek in all this stuff and loved this stuff as much as I do.
Can I tell you something? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julian.
No, you go ahead, David.
I was going to say there was something magical about it. I agree with you. And this is going to sound really lame. I remember when you were there, I remember you were all like hanging out in your room and you had all your papers everywhere. And you were one of the few people, I think you brought like a stereo. You brought like this little stereo. It was like a JBL Charge, this little thing,
Yep.
Worked through Bluetooth. And I just remember seeing you were so peaceful. Other people were like, oh my goodness, am I alive? Am I like, what's going on throughout this whole process? And you were like, oh, this is cool. You were like the person who throughout turbulence was like whistling or something like that, And I remember thinking, what a cool way to be. And this is going to sound so lame, but I like picked up the same speaker. Like I went and bought the same. I was like, that makes sense. Like it's a small thing, Ray's like streamlined here. And I was like, when I travel, I didn't used to bring music. I didn't used to sort of set the stage, set the environment for this really nice, nerdy, like kind of make my own home wherever I go. And now when I travel for work and I go to hotels, and in the past, it'd be kind of like I was staying somewhere foreign, but now I try to make it my home in a way that you seemed really at home in True North.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
I
like,
take that JBL charge all over. I
I
took
was
it
gonna
to
say
China.
I could corroborate that he does that everywhere.
Yeah, I take it everywhere,
It's so
and
inspiring.
it's fantastic to be
Yeah.
able to do that. Yeah, it's just
it makes things fun. It makes
yeah,
things
to me
easy.
there was nothing miserable. Obviously, I wasn't afraid of it, so there was nothing miserable, and I was just ecstatic every day. I mean, every morning when I would wake up and I would be able to, I would be doing my and you came in sometimes when I do it. I'd do that morning calorimetry, and so sometimes when the staff came in to check my check in on me and do blood pressure, etc., I would be there with that hood and I'd be in the middle of doing a calorimetry run. And to me, it was just great every single day. Every single day, I just thought it was amazing that I could do this. And a lot of you, I brought a lot of you in during the time period to measure metabolism. And for most people, that was the first time they've really ever had their metabolism measured or ever been a part of it. And I find really two things fascinating: that we tell all these people they're broken and that their metabolism's slow, et cetera, when it's really just the food, and they never measure metabolism. And of course, now it's even worse because some people have actually started doing this, believing that you're gonna somehow predict with their metabolism that they have to eat a certain way. And then the second thing is the idea that so many healthcare providers, and it's the one thing, if I could change anything about the system, if you were a nurse, a dietitian, a physician, any of the healthcare providers, I would make it mandatory that you do at least a 7-day fast and track your what do you call it? Track your vitals. I don't know. Track your
biochemical.
Yeah, just track your biomarkers, because it would eliminate so much confusion. And I can't believe, and I'm going to use the word, and I mean it in the literal sense, I can't believe how many healthcare professionals are incompetent when it comes to understanding fasting. And, I know Michael Clapper's had to deal with this. Goldhammer has to deal with this. It's crazy how many people don't know anything about it. And I'm not trying to popularize it or make it, like the fad thing that it's become. But the fact that you can get through medical school and not understand what happens to the body after 2 weeks of no food, that to me is a pretty big oversight. Or
when I almost got killed in the ER.
Or study nutrition. How can all these people finish medical school or even nursing school
let's not even start
and not
on
even understand the nutrition? And then all the dietitians, how can they get out of, become an RD and not understand plant-based diets?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean, guys? How I feel like we're in a unique place. And that was what was so magical, I think, to add to your magical comment there. That was another thing that was so magical, is that you just really get to watch your body go through this. And I think it's just an amazing opportunity. I was at ease the whole time.
I have such FOMO. I think we should all go do that, try to recreate it.
Yeah, it was cool.
We had a blast.
It was really fun. The number of experiments we could have run there just with your little device. Can I just tell you one other study? I'm not going to get into it, but I'll just tell you the title of it, because this is literally when I read this.
Let me get my search bar ready. I love this. Okay,
cool.
Okay, go.
So this is called, the title totally ruins it because you know what happens. Twice as high diet-induced thermogenesis after breakfast versus dinner on high-calorie as well as low-calorie meals. So, right, they're just looking at, how much are you burning when you eat the same meal, breakfast or
Wait, say that one more time.
Oh, it's called Twice as High Diet-Induced Thermogenesis after breakfast versus dinner on high-calorie as well as low-calorie meals. This was just published in March, so this month as well. But this is exactly, every time I read this kind of thing, I'm like, we could have done that. Like, we totally could have just studied that kind of thing. Anyway, maybe in a next life, or maybe even this life, we'll build a metabolic chamber for.
We have it here, and we plan over. as we succeed with Science and Saucery, and as we get our business Ephros, completely off the ground and have that kind of extra resources. I want to do these kinds of collaborative events that last a week or two with all of our friends. I've said this before in our podcast. I watch a lot of these boat building videos and people who are building 100-year-old ships with the old wooden boats. I love those YouTube channels. I really want to do some of these experiments, and I don't care if they're N01, and I don't even care if we can publish them at the moment. I just want to do things that I know to be valid science, and really bring forward a lot of that work from 100 years ago, because there's a lot of data that's out there, and all we have to do is reproduce some data that's already been collected in, with lots of people, so we just want to reproduce some of the historical things, and these are all really good ideas. It's a huge missed opportunity there. I think they could be doing a lot more research there, and I don't know, I would love it. And with you two, having you two by my side, this is really great. I have like these this right now, everybody listen, these are my two total geek friends in terms of Juliana and David. I can't think of any two better people that I would want, by my side if I was you going into the nutritional fire.
Thank you. You'd be going into the library.
Yeah. That too.
Or the lab.
Yeah. But yeah, we definitely will stay in touch. And as we put our Patreon stuff in place and our YouTube channel in place, and we're starting to do more video and live streaming, I think these are the things we really want to do, because we have access to the industry. We have access to experts in many, many fields. And I really want to do it. I mean, we talked about it when we were there. It's something that would be phenomenal.
Sign me up.
All right. So we'll thank you so much for being with us today. This has been really, really a lot of fun.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom, David.
Thank you for having me on. I'm grateful. It's really nice speaking with you guys. I find out very often I get maybe too ecstatic, too exuberant about these sorts of things, and people are like, "Whoa, like easy, it's just food." But I like
that.
We're there with you.
The best. Yeah, we're right there. If you ever need that reality check, we're here. We're here for you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was really fascinating. It's so nice to be on the same page.
I love talking to David. He has been just a unbelievable resource of information.
And I want to say to everyone out there to not panic, embrace this time. It's kind of an opportunity that I haven't seen in my lifetime. Most of us haven't. And it's okay. Relax a little more. Spend time with your loved ones. Eat a little less. Eat healthy staple foods that hopefully you've already had stocked or have around you. And take care of those around you that need some help.
Yeah, it was a really good message, and it's not a need to panic. So you can eat a little less. You can use a little less toilet paper. I thought that was really a funny way to spin it. But,
yeah.
But with that, we need to bring this to a close.
Yes. Well, this is all good. And thank you all so much for being here and joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food. So remember, keep
eating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show, or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.